Okay. As you come on into the webinar, welcome everybody. I'm Matt Whale, Managing Director of How to Impact, and I'm speaking today from Gadigal land, the home of the Eora Nation, and I'd like to pay my respects to their elders, past and present. This is the third webinar from our Food Futures Lab, and the aim of the lab is to explore some of the bigger issues affecting the Australian food system, some of those really long-term, gnarly challenges that are quite often hard to bring into focus for today. And our goal is to try and bridge that gap to make them more useful, more tangible for today's food strategists. And one of the ways we do that is to bring experts together into a provocative debate. And I have two here who I'll introduce in a minute. And it's really about making these topics something that you can put into action. We're calling it tomorrow's food, today's strategy. It's really about making it as tangible as possible. And we'll be looking at today, do you know why you eat what you eat, and the psychology of eating. We've actually identified 12 macro topics. The first two were around where our palate comes from, which is a fantastic exploration of sort of social cultural evolution. The second one, much more scientific, was around the future of protein. There's so much focus on that. This one around psychology of eating brings together physical and digital media, socioeconomic factors, physiological drivers, the psychology of overweight. And it's fascinating. We were just saying beforehand, we're sitting here on day two of and if you're listening on the podcast, we're recording this on day two of the social media ban for under 16-year-olds in Australia, which is a huge social experiment and one driven by the amount of unrequired, unrequested noise that's out there. And it's fascinating when you put the food lens over that we in Australia, on average, make 200 decisions about food every day, which is roughly one every 5 waking minutes, which is an abundance of food noise. Why is there so much food noise? How do we respond to it? How is it affecting our nutrition? And how do we manage this to support better outcomes? So luckily for us, in our panel, we actually have someone whose work contributed towards that social media ban, Dr. Tamara Bucher, who leads Nutrition and Dietetics at Bern University in Switzerland and has a long-standing relationship with the food science program at Newcastle University. And very fortunately for us, Tamara has just returned to the country. And with her, we have Dr. Joanna McMillan, who is a nutrition scientist, lifestyle medicine expert, author, TV presenter, food futurist, and all-round guru on nutrition. And her ninth book, The Fiber Factor, is due for release in March 2026. And you might well find Jo back here doing a one-on-one just to talk about fiber specifically for us. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you, Matt.
So
Excited to be here.
200 decisions about food every day. It seems excessive. Why is there so much food noise?
Well, Matt, we are exposed to so much food every day and at all times. So even like when you wake up and check your phone, you will see some advertisements on social media. There's just food around us 24/7. It's so easily accessible. It's just everywhere. And each time you see something, you got to decide to, well, buy it or not, or eat it or not. So we make a lot of decisions around food.
And is it mostly social media, or is it all forms of media, or is it actually even just our own sort of presence and proximity to food, food retailers, food supermarkets, fast food?
Well, look, food advertisements are on all form of media. It's just that we spend most of the time on social media now. It used to be TV advertisements, and they're a bit easier to control if it comes to bans and on advertisements. But now, like we spend so much time on social media, so we're mostly exposed to social media advertisement.
Right.
There's also the exposure that we have just in our day-to-day life. I sort of often give the example of, I mean, a lot of those food decisions we're making, we're doing it unconsciously. We're not even aware that we had so many food decisions to make. But, someone walks into my office here eating an ice cream, and I think, oh, an ice cream, that would be nice. You're making all of those sorts of decisions all of the time. And yeah, if we look back, one of my big areas of interest is evolutionary nutrition. And that was an original part of my PhD many moons ago. But, when we look through an evolutionary lens, we never had this sort of confrontation of food around us all the time. We had to work quite hard to get our food. So you can see that, it's one case where potentially our appetite drivers and our mechanisms within our biological mechanisms within our bodies haven't quite caught up yet to the food environment we find ourselves in.
And it sounds like the sort of unbidden, unconscious food noise is we're assuming it's bad for us. Is that the case? Is it as black and white as this noise is not welcome? This noise is by people trying to sell us food that we don't need. Is it that black and white?
It's actually really bad, and studies have shown that our environment really influences what we eat. So the more we are exposed to food and food advertisement, the more we are eating. And yeah, I mean, it's unconscious effects because we can't think about all those, like we can't consciously make all those decisions. It's really habitual. If you walk through supermarkets, you can't really spend a long time to read all food labels. So you gotta be quick. It's low involvement decisions, really. So yeah, it has a
So there's
more influence than we think.
direct correlation between the amount that we're exposed to food and the amount we eat.
Yes.
Wow.
And the food choices that we make. I've worked with supermarkets over the years, and of course, supermarkets have to provide food, and they have to provide the less healthy foods as well. Everyone gets a choice. I always say, I'll give you the nutrition science, but it's deliciously up to you what you decide to eat. But unless we can help people to make those healthier choices, you're fighting a losing battle. If you walk into a supermarket and everything at eye level, it's been a long time since I had little kids, but when my kids were little, it used to be a nightmare when you got to the checkout and you've got a toddler in the chair and they're right at the prime level of picking up the lollies and the chocolate and the confectionery that's all right there at the checkout counter. So that's just one very obvious example of where a simple move by the supermarkets, and most here in Australia have now done that. Said, okay, we'll move the confectionery away or at least give confectionery free aisles for parents to go down. But if you just think of the impact of if we were to make those sorts of decisions everywhere to try to make it easier for people to make healthier choices rather than constantly having to battle against this food noise of hyper palatable type foods.
Mhm.
It's also a numbers game in the end because we are exposed to a lot of food and a lot of food that is unhealthy. So if you walk through aisles that only contain unhealthy or like highly processed foods, you're much more likely to choose those. So it's also a matter of what can you even choose if you go into a supermarket, and if there's like very little fresh food available, it's really hard to make those decisions.
Yeah, and I think we're going to start unpicking a lot of this. And you introduced me to the D.O.N.E model, so that's D.O.N.E, the determinants of nutritional eating, Tamara, which is fascinating, and I won't do it justice. So can you please explain what that is and what it tells us about the psychology of eating?
Yes, you said it correctly. D.O.N.E means determinants of nutrition and eating. And it's really a theoretical framework where a lot of experts from different disciplines, over 300 experts, came together to kind of collate the factors that really influence what we are eating every day. And they structured those factors into individual factors like your personality, how hungry you are, demographics, and interpersonal factors, or your families, your people that are around you, environmental things like portion sizes, the products, the marketing, and also policy like the regulations we have, for example, sugar taxes or food labeling and so on. And they found like there are so many factors influencing what we eat. And if we as consumers think about what influences our eating, we often respond with, ah, yeah, this is tasty, I'm hungry. But we're not thinking about all these external factors that influence what we choose, like what our family likes or what we have available in the environment. In the end, like if you have a work function, for example, you tend to eat what is there. You don't really have a choice. You can choose within the offers given, but in the end, you can only eat what you gotta have, like what you have available, and also whether something is even affordable or you have the kitchen and the time to prepare food. So it's not like we have a lot less influence on what we are eating than we think.
Yeah. And you said it's a theoretical model, but clearly you're running experiments within this model. And what are the factors that you're looking at that have both the greatest influence on how and what we eat, as well as the greatest malleability, controllability. Where are you focusing your efforts?
Yeah, so I'm very interested in food environments because this model also shows that those factors have a major influence and they are modifiable. So these are things we can change to influence nutrition and food choice at the population level. So we are running a lot of experiments on how we can, for example, restructure canteens or online web shops to promote healthier choices and to nudge um, healthy and also sustainable food choices.
And Joe, you talked about working with the retailers and supermarkets. Obviously, they're one of they control both physical and digital environments for us. And I think it's really interesting. You said, it's deliciously up to you what you choose to eat. But what do you think is the role of those retailers in taking an educational responsibility in that space versus just literally making it a free choice for us all?
Yeah, I was actually presenting a masterclass to some of the major retailers here in Australia lately, and that this was exactly the point that I made, is that they do have a role and they have a responsibility. I'm a trained dietitian. I no longer run one-on-one clinics, but when you look at the figures of how many people, how many times a year does the average person see a dietitian? Now, they're lucky if they see a dietitian or a nutrition expert of any sort once. They perhaps see their GP, 5 or 6 times, if that. And when they see the GP, it's usually for 10 minutes. Nutrition is not something that's usually discussed unless the GP is on the ball and is trying to refer them to a dietitian. But a retailer, well, people are into the supermarket or grocers or whoever it might be, but most people are shopping at these major retailers and they're probably in there at least once, if not more often, a week. So the point I've made to retailers is they have a huge role to play, both in terms of I love that idea of just helping healthy, making it easier to eat healthily, essentially, is what I'm trying to encourage them to do. And they do have a role to play in terms of education. So it was actually quite nice because at the end of the master classes, we had a bit of a workshop together and they were coming up with ideas of what could they do to improve their nutrition communication to help make it easier for people to make healthier choices, essentially, from what they have on pack. Lots of the supermarkets are now moving very much towards own brands. So that gives them the opportunity to influence what goes on the pack. And we've got lots of data around what drives purchase. Price is obviously always the major one, but nutrition factors and nutrition callouts have a huge influence. People are interested in eating better and they really want to eat better. So I hope we see that starting to change. I mean, certainly we see that around the world. We presented some data from UK supermarkets as well as Australian, showing that some retailers really are on the front foot with this and are trying their best. But because price and it's a business at the end of the day comes into play, we still see, specials on soft drinks or, the front of the catalogue is dominated by less healthy foods and it's very hard to get around these things. But look, I hope we're moving at least in the right direction.
It's fascinating you say that, Joe, because how many months ago was it that we were talking about South Australian government putting a ban on junk food, and
Mm.
yet no one could agree what the definition of junk food was. Tomorrow, you and I were talking about this back near at the time, and if we can't agree what the definitions are, then it's really hard to actually turn around to the retailers and say you need to, pull yourselves in line because we don't have a central policy on this.
Mhm.
B, to then start talking about how they and the manufacturers who supply to them advertise their foods, and then C, the tertiary audience around that, which is social media, and how they are paid to cross promote and repurpose these messages when we can't agree on our single messaging. And is that for me, I think around psychology of eating, that seems to be one of the biggest things that holds us back as a country is looking at the social media ban for under 16s. You could do a lot of different things within there. You could ban the more addictive elements like scrolling or unwanted videos. You could put a curfew on it, but because we don't have this central food ministry that gives us rules, the one solution we have is like, well, let's just do a blanket ban. South Australia on food junk advertising, nationally on the 16 social media. Is that a fair comment?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a fair comment, and it's super hard to define what is healthy or not, because in the end, whether something is healthy or not is not black and white. It's a gray scale, and that's really hard to understand for consumers. In the end, it always matters how much of a thing you eat, how much of an influence it has on
Mm.
your health. But I mean, the health star rating is a really good starting point. It's actually been invented in the UK for that purpose, to ban advertisement for unhealthy foods to children. So this profiling system has been invented for that purpose. And then it's been taken as a labeling system, and consumers really understand what it means. And it's fairly successful in Australia, and it's a model for other countries as well.
I
And,
think
and
part of the trouble, just to jump in there, I was at the big nutrition conference in Paris. I don't know if you were there,
Ah,
Tamara.
yes, I
You
was.
were there. I thought you might have been. I wish we'd been able to connect then. There was a lot of talk at that conference about ultra processed foods, and my colleagues and I were discussing one of the problems are all these new, scientific papers are coming out using previous data on food frequency questionnaires and the various methods we have of ascertaining what people eat at a population level. But we don't have a scientific definition of what an ultra processed food is. And these food frequency questionnaires were not designed to pick up what they think these definitions are. So it makes it very, very difficult. And I completely agree with Tamara that, we're getting there in terms of trying to have some sort of labeling system, but there's also problems with those systems. So
Mhm.
there's some major flaws in our health star rating system. It works relatively well on packaged ultra processed foods, but we don't seem to have the sophistication. And I never know why when we've got these very complex algorithms that, I've got a son who's at final year university doing computer science, and they work with these extraordinarily complex algorithms, but we can't seem to get anything more complex than looking at four key nutrients and some positive nutrients in food. So I
Yeah.
find that immensely frustrating. We could do better in terms of helping to really not have food so labeled as black and white, and not to have so many foods that are falling through the cracks and being unfairly labeled as with not so many stars, and equally other foods that have a few supplements added to them and then suddenly get more stars than really are warranted. So I think, we've made a start, but we've got a long way to go yet.
Yeah.
yeah, it does feel like there are a couple of dog whistle definitions or terminology that get people riled. The
Mm.
junk food. I think most people would have an assumption of what that is, but ultra processed. We were talking about. So what does that make yogurt with fruit in it? Is that an ultra processed fruit? Would people consider that to be a really bad and unhealthy product?
Yeah,
And,
this is
and
a
then there
really
are
hard
foods.
one.
Yeah, and then there's the foods where the nutritional availability is increased through processing, or they're made more palatable through process, and obviously they're made longer lasting, which is a considerable economic consideration for every household. No one wants unprocessed foods that go off within 2 days. We'd be we'd be spending 30% of our time shopping. With those 200 food decisions would be up into the three, four, fives.
I
Uh,
always remind people that actually, let's remember that another big area of interest for most of us in nutrition science is about how are we going to feed the 10 billion people by 2050, and with the challenges of changing climates and so on and so forth across the course of food systems across the world. And let's remember that ultra processed foods and science has a role to play here. Ultra processing at the end of the day, I had a colleague who wrote a brilliant article on this that was around how women were freed up from the kitchen and able to get back into the workforce in the sort of, 60s, 70s, 80s. As a result, essentially, of processing of foods and ready-made meals and so on. And who of us, don't sometimes use a ready-made sauce or whatever
mm.
it might be. So, I think it's what I like about the term ultra processing is that it does help to differentiate between some level of processing, which can be not only helpful, but can improve shelf life, reduce food waste, make food safer, make food tastier. We're the only species on Earth who actually has cuisine and not just food. So we cook our food, which makes it often tastier as well as potentially healthier, and makes some nutrients more available. Canned tinned tomatoes and tomato paste has more available lycopene than a fresh tomato is one really great, nice example. So I do like that ultra processing, the term is differentiating that idea of some level of processing can be incredibly helpful and might help us to solve some of these problems that we have in the future of food.
And within that, I think you mentioned education levels. And we talked about the psychology of eating. We talked about conscious versus unconscious decisions. It does require, doesn't it, a significant ability to understand what food balance is. And equally, Joe, you're talking about the fact that processing tomato actually gets you more lycopene, which is a positive benefit. Where do you think that we stand in terms of, are we losing food education and nutritional education and therefore making different decisions? Where do you think we stand as a nation in terms of our ability to balance and inform the little voice on the shoulder saying, I'm hungry, I'm craving something, versus your body needs this is what you should be feeding yourself?
Yeah, look, I think that's really, and I'm going to throw this to Tamara in a second to hear about what's going on in Europe. But it's certainly, if I comment on, my mum was a domestic science teacher back in her day in Scotland and taught kids essentially nutrition. I mean, she tells me nutrition's changed a lot since her day, but they were at least learning basic nutrition, vitamins, minerals, what basic nutrition was. And they learned basic skills in the kitchen. And then when we were my brothers and I were teenagers, mum went back, had taken a career break, went back. And even by that stage, and I'm 53 now, so this is going back 40 odd years. Even by that stage, the domestic science had become home economics. They were no longer learning such basic nutrition. The things that they did in the kitchen were not basic nutrition things, cooking skills anymore. They were sort of strange sort of concoction. She didn't enjoy it so much anymore. And then fast forward to today, my boys are 19 and 21, and their teenage years, they did very little nutrition at school, and they certainly didn't do any cooking whatsoever. So had they not had some sort of level of skill and at home and watching me cook, I think I've done a poor job with one of them. He doesn't seem to cook very much, but the other one seems to be fairly competent. But how do we ensure that the next generation have the skills in the kitchen to know how to budget for the week, how to feed a household for the week, or never mind just feed themselves for a week, how to use leftovers? A lot of my time, I feel like I'm talking just how to simply create a shopping list, create meals that you do a roast on a Sunday and you use the leftover meat, and a dish on the Monday, you make stock with the bones, and then that makes a soup. All of those skills that our grandmothers and mothers had, those skills are being lost along the way as we move very much towards, buying food in much more of a convenience way. So this is something we do definitely have to address. Otherwise, we fear kitchens in the future will simply be a microwave and perhaps a toaster, and I think that's already happening in some apartment blocks in London. So we unless we give people those skills, then how can we get them eating better?
Yeah.
Tamara, tell us about Europe.
Yeah, you've got a
Yeah,
foot in two continents here, Tamara.
I completely agree. Culinary education is absolutely important because otherwise you really depend on convenience food. The more you know about nutrition and cooking, the less you depend on buying ultra processed foods, and the more you can judge. In Switzerland, we are actually fortunate that nutrition and culinary education is still part of the curriculum in school. So every student in high school, the boys and girls, they learn how to cook, basic recipes, how to shop and plan for the week. We have a national cookbook that contains some very basic recipes, like how to make a salad dressing, how to make a sauce, how to pickle, things like that. And a lot of Swiss people still have that at home. But the curriculum also in Switzerland becomes more crowded, and we have to fight to keep that in, because it's competing with things that should also be taught about, like all the knowledge around IT, digital media, and so on. It's also important. So students have to learn more and more, and we have to compete to really keep our space in the curriculum.
I think it's fascinating as well when you talk about you waste, Joe. Like, don't waste the food, and you'd have to have the knowledge of doing it. It was lovely. It was a lovely article about a year ago about a woman who, her and her husband, I think, had both lost their jobs, and she started using AI to go through what she had in the fridge and in the cupboards to come up with meal ideas that was, maximum utilization of her resources, and then she was using it to help with her shopping lists. And suddenly she said, we're eating really well. We're eating foods that we didn't normally do. We're not wasting anything. And it's so much more affordable. So there is a space where you go, well, surely technology can help us in that space. And then there's the other factor where you go, well, with every cost of living a challenge, which means, we should be, watching our purse strings. Red meat seems more expensive than white, we should switch over. There's obviously the cost of living denial, where you're seeing this particularly in younger generations going, well, sod it then. It's tough to eat. I think it was, the avocado toast gate came out a few years ago, that inflammatory conversation around if if millennials spent less money on avocado toast, they'd be able to afford a mortgage. And I think the response was, if we'd be able to afford a mortgage, we wouldn't have to sit and in misery and commiserate with avocado on toast. But yeah, there's definitely two balances there, aren't there? Which is we respond to lower income by trying to eat, more frugally, but where we actually feel stressed out and our mental health is suffering, actually food is a really important source of succor and, and kind of almost commiseration.
It is. Look, I often use the line that food is more than the nutrients it contains. And that's just a reflection on, when we look at the blue zones, for example, around the world, that lovely research that is looking at the people who have the kind of longest, healthiest lives. There's a common thread through all of them that kind of social connection and prioritizing meals. I always love to visit Japan and Mediterranean countries. These are places where, there is still some priority given around mealtime. There's less of that sort of grabbing meals on the run, and we sometimes have this sort of very strange relationship in Western countries like Australia, where we know we love food, but we then also sort of feel as if, well, that's a bit of a waste of time. There's other things to be done, and we've got to be working hard, and it's like you're being lazy if you took time out to go and sit and have lunch, or to meet somebody for lunch and take an hour over your lunch. And I think we have to sort of change that, because food is about social connection. It is about sharing, and it's a really important part of stress management and eating really well. Generally, when people eat together and they prepare food together, and whether it's sharing shopping lists or buying food together in order to be able to share bulk buy, for example, those sorts of things are really important parts of community. So yeah, there's a lot to food that goes beyond just the nutrition science. I think you brought up something else interesting there, Matt, which is around that sustainability, and when the Australian research that's been done on what are the steps that we can take as consumers to make the biggest strides in terms of having a sustainable diet, and food waste was number one. And the second thing was so limiting your food waste. And the second thing actually was eating closer to the Australian dietary guidelines. Now, we could have a whole session on arguing over whether the Australian dietary guidelines have got mistakes or not. But the bottom line is very few Australians are actually following them. And this research showed that were we to eat closer to the guidelines, eating less junk food or ultra processed food, whatever we want to call it, in fact, we have a more affordable but also more sustainable diet. And that's been shown time and time again. So I think we've got to be careful with this idea of healthy eating is always more expensive. We've got a number of studies. Some of my colleagues down at Deakin University, for example, have shown that following a Mediterranean diet is cheaper than following a typical kind of Western junk food type diet. So that brings us back around to that idea of teaching people the skills of how to cook things for themselves, because often savings can be made.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And you said about the portion, I mean, like the portions that we're eating as well. I think one of your points, Tamara, from the D.O.N.E model again, was that pack sizes is actually an incredibly simple way of changing what we eat and how we eat, and affecting our nutrition. What are the other really obvious learnings from the D.O.N.E model around maybe things that we're not so aware of what's impacting, how we think about what we're eating?
Yeah, portion size, as you mentioned, is one of the biggest ones. And unfortunately, the portion sizes of pretty much everything have increased over the last decades, and value for money is driving this. So we are seeking value, and it's much cheaper to produce more content. And offer a bigger package, because the price of a product mostly depends on really the marketing and the packaging, and not really on the content. So consumers are really happy if you give them more. So yeah, it's very profitable to offer bigger packets, and then you pour more into your, let's say, cereal bowl, and we end up eating more because also we don't want to waste food. So this is one of the main drivers, but there are others. We actually do some studies that show that even pictures and colors in online shops influence what you are eating. So we are really triggered by things we never think about. So whether there's something looks green and sustainable and tasty, has a big impact on whether it's appealing or not. So aesthetics play a big role in making nice, colorful packaging. Like cereal packages are really appealing to kids sometimes. We have now, we can't, or industry can't, they can no longer use kind of cartoon characters, but the packaging still really is appealing. So those kind of things have influences that we are not aware of, but we could technically, control them through policy and also working with supermarkets to really optimize their environments for promoting a bit more healthy and sustainable choices.
And do you have an overlap with that, with sort of synesthesia, that lovely science of different music, different sounds will make food taste differently? That the famous experiment where people put red and white wine at the same temperature in black glasses so that you couldn't tell what color it was, and people just struggling to tell which one's which. Is that something that you've also looked at? Because I think that's fascinating in terms of restaurant design. I went pub, Joe, you'll know this because you live locally. There's a new Papa Flock in Bondi Junction, and it's opposite the McDonald's. And Papa Flock is bright orange, and it's got really loud music going on in it, but it's got fun music. And I saw a young girl in there, maybe 13, 14, and she was waiting, and she was happily dancing to the music in Pub Flock. Just across the walkway is McDonald's. And what's when you hear mostly from McDonald's is the beeping from the machines in the kitchen, which need to be emptied. And I tell you what, I reckon you'd have to go some way to convince that 13-year-old girl to cross over and have a dance in McDonald's. So clearly, the music was making her enjoy the space a lot more. I'd imagine, in the terms of psychology of eating, it would make her enjoy the food a lot more too. So there's that piece to it as well, like the clever stuff that makes us appreciate or think we appreciate food a lot more through synesthesia.
Yes, definitely. So, as you say, music and a pleasant environment leads us to enjoy more and spend more time in a place. So, and if you spend more time in a supermarket, you also tend to spend more money. And there's also things like sense using odors to advertise or to increase the atmosphere or the pleasantness of a shop. So, if you go to a clothes shop like H&M or Zara, they all got their own perfume. So they have
Mm,
the specific smell in every country. So they smell the same all over the world. And with the food shops, it's the same. You probably know the Subway smell from far
mm,
from far away. You can tell, oh, there's a Subway somewhere. So
yeah,
this is really this really relates to our innate reflexes to recognize something, and senses are the most important thing when we eat food. The pleasantness plays an important role, and we can manipulate that for the good or the bad.
yeah.
We can also use certain perfumes to make things more appealing that are healthier. You could, in theory, it doesn't happen a lot, but we are looking into how we can make healthy foods more appealing. And we have been experimenting with some flavors and odors to make fruits and vegetables more appealing, or to nudge people towards choosing fruits and vegetables over other foods.
What's an example of that? Have you been putting the smell of chocolate on pickled cabbage or something?
I think like we know that they have to be congruent. So if something smells a bit off, that wouldn't work. So it's
Yeah.
gotta have some relationship with the product or the food in this case. So we know that things like minty natural flavors could work, but it's very, very small effects.
Oh, okay. Well, it's fascinating because we're kind of going full circle back to food noise and manipulating food noise. And one of the ways to manipulate food noise that we've encountered as a population is to turn it off chemically. And that's what obviously one of the reasons why people are using GLP-1. And it helps turn food noise down. Joe, you've been looking at the psychology of overweight recently, haven't you? And
Mm.
what do you think the broader implications are for the use of, like a chemical intervention like GLP-1? Is that right to say a chemical intervention? Is that it?
Well, I mean, technically, they're GLP-1 mimicking medications. And look, there's no doubt about it. We have to recognize the research is very strong in suggesting these can be game changing for people who are struggling with metabolic disease. So these are people who are struggling to get their type 2 diabetes under control. And mostly for, the two key areas are type 2 diabetes and also for overweight and obesity. Where I get concerned is where these drugs are being used. I live in the eastern suburbs of Sydney. It's a relatively affluent area. Friends who are on the North Shore, similarly, these areas where these medications are essentially being abused by people who are of a healthy weight already just to get even thinner. And we don't have studies about what the long-term implications of that are, and it's not being well monitored. And, I can think of two people just very close to me off the top of my head who I have grave concerns that there's an underlying eating disorder, that it's being exacerbated by the use of these medications. They're lying to telehealth in order to get the medications in the first place, where there's not even a video call, it's just a telephone call, and they've worked out what weight they have to say in order to get the medication, and they're seriously underweight. And I fear we're going to have this wave of nutrition deficiencies, osteoporosis, and other problems. Your brain needs particular nutrients to function well, never mind the rest of your body in terms of long-term health. So I think most people working in this space are really pushing for these medications should be used as part of a team approach where they have support from psychologists, they have support from dietitians or other nutrition professionals in order to make sure, because if you're eating less, you've got to eat even better to make sure that you're getting your nutrients. If you're eating a really broad, varied, mixed diet and you've got space for a few little treats of whatever it is that you fancy, when you're eating a very tiny amount of food, you've got to make sure that's very nutrient dense food. So unless they're getting the correct support, they're falling through the cracks. So I think we've got a sort of double-edged knife here, the double-edged sword, whatever the expression is, that we've got the problem of overweight and obesity, and there's no doubt that that's a global issue, and these medications can be game-changing in that area. But the flip side of it is that we also have a lot of malnourishment, including people who are overweight and obese. And so we have to make sure that we're not forgetting about nutrition. And in amongst of this sort of blur is this brings us right into the area of psychology, the idea of body image, of what is beautiful, what is attractive, for men and for women. Men are increasingly into this line of fire. And actually that brings us back to where we started with social media.
Yeah.
It's interesting because when you talk about that, I wonder what the physiological chain is, when you're talking about the psychology of eating and how that addresses and influences our view on what food is. Public consumption versus private consumption. But also, Joe, we talked about your book on fiber coming out, how much we often talk about the gut as being a brain. How much does the gut tell us and influence us about food? And do you get different messages from a healthy and an unhealthy microbiome?
You absolutely do. And in fact, I've got a whole chapter in the book on the kind of Ozempic effect of fiber and protein and other aspects of food actually influence our own. I mean, GLP-1 is a natural hormone you produce in your body, but it's only one of part of a whole suite of different hormones that are involved in sending signals from your gut to your brain to tell you food's coming in, calm down appetite. We don't need to keep having a drive for food. And so it's possible that actually some of this sort of food noise around is because we're interrupting those natural flows because of the way that we're eating. Ultra processed food, generally speaking, it tends to be highly palatable, easier to eat, softer, less chewing. You can eat it fast, so you can get a big load of kilojoules or calories into you very, very quickly, which almost sort of doesn't allow this natural cycle of this signal from your gut to your brain to sort of slow down your eating in time. You've already consumed the kilojoules. It's almost that kind of Christmas lunch feeling of lying on the sofa going, oh God, I ate, when you don't get that feeling immediately, but you do a short time after eating. So, a big part of trying to get your own appetite signals working really well is by having that return to high fiber and high protein rich foods, which are essentially just whole foods. We don't need these things pumped in into fortified foods. We see this craziness with protein at the moment where you can get protein chips and protein water. Hey, you can just have a piece of meat or a piece of seafood or an egg or some dairy, glass of milk. These things are all natural sources of protein, and the same is true of fiber. So when you eat more of that kind of whole food diet, and you eat in a particular way that involves sitting down, eating together, eating slowly, all of these things that we try to teach people about how to eat better and to feel more in control. Actually, what's happening then is that you're feeding the good microbes in your microbiome, you're getting good signals to the brain around, and it's pretty outlandish kind of research to think about, your microbes in your gut can be influencing your decisions around food. We're not quite puppets with the microbes as our puppeteers, but there's no doubt that there are these signaling things that we're only starting to understand. And when you eat well, it sort of motivates you to eat well further, and you sort of get into a cycle of eating better, and it becomes easier to resist those less healthy foods.
Yeah, that is it's definitely a whole nother topic worthy of
Yeah.
discussion. And I'm aware that we've got about 15 minutes left. So there are a couple of topics that correlate with a question or two that have popped up as well, which I'd love to get into. One of them for me is we've talked a lot about social media as noise, but what about media, the established media, and its role in obviously perpetuating the desire for newness? Because I think that's an interesting part of food. You talked about, um, you know, how important the environment is. Well, different environments, like different sounds, vibes, different designs, are all part of restaurant reinvention. And is that a positive or a negative part of, like, when you think of the broader psychology of eating, that there should be food to look forward to. It's exciting to think about that. We were interviewed the guys at Time Out Sydney, the food and drinks editor, Avril, and she was talking about that they have so much bandwidth to talk about restaurants, and they feel really terrible because there are restaurants that survive and they're really popular. They don't get attention, but they put attention on the new one. But they also feel that they need to give it a fair crack and a bit of publicity, to promote it. But is it actually just encouraging people to swap and change rather than support their local restaurants? And I think it's a fascinating debate, and there's definitely a sense of um, the culture, especially around maybe under 30s, in terms of social media, creating a higher desirability to eat out and to spend that hard-earned money that you haven't got. And I'm sure, Tamara, you would have come across this in terms of the studies that you did with young people and social media too.
Yes, newness is an interesting one because there's a personality trait which we call food neophobia, or being scared of new things. And there's really people that like new things and like trying new products, but there's also others that prefer safe, known food and try to eat what they already know and like stick to their habits. So it really depends. And we do know that like extroverts have a bit lower levels of food neophobia, or a bit less scared of trying new things. And of course, yeah, if you are an extrovert and are trying or liking new things, and yes, then you probably tend to swap restaurants and try to find new things. And yeah, that's not the best thing for
But,
all
what I also say, you talking about extroverts, or what Avril actually said to me was she's really noticed the difference with Gen Z, who are spending money on much more expensive meals because they're doing it conspicuously and sharing it. They're posting the live feeds. They're constantly reviewing the food as they eat it. We've got a fabulous little Japanese restaurant downstairs from our office, and it's beautifully done. It's kind of like little teapots that you pour the broth out and all this stuff. And there is not a single day that you do not go past that without someone having their phone out, taking pictures of their food, right? And I think this is a really significant phenomenon in our society, which is we've moved to an incredibly conspicuous level of consumption of food in some pockets, versus the newness that you talked about could be limited editions. Here's an really exciting stuff that you just need to go get. And I guess it all layers, right? It's all part of that noise that we talked about at the beginning.
Yeah, definitely. Social media plays a big role. It contributes to newness or trying to find newness and posting. We have
Mm.
food porn. Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder if to try to spin a positive on it, and maybe I'm saying this because I've just started a TikTok channel and started that yesterday, thinking, I've got a book coming out. Everyone tells me that TikTok is the place to promote your book. Anyway, and I, of course, have an active Instagram and Facebook account. Is there a way of us trying to use, I mean, it's hard for someone who's a nutrition scientist to always trying to be breakthrough with here's the actual science and you're trying to break through some of that noise. But my feeling is unless some of us do it, then all there is the nonsense out there, not the really good facts and the actual information coming from proper science. But we can also use that social media to promote honesty and transparency around, a really good friend of mine in media, Shelley Horton, she and I were talking about this the other day, and she was saying she's making a conscious effort to make sure her social media feed is not just Shelley with her hair done and makeup done and looking fabulous when she's on television or emceeing an event. She also posts when she's down and grumpy and tired or sick or, looking terrible because she's just finished a workout or whatever it might be. So, I sort of feel the same about food. If we start being a little bit more, instead of those Instagram perfect meals, if we can all be a bit more honest about the way that we eat or the challenges that there are, and make sure that good information gets into social media, then it can be a force for good.
That's a really lovely point, Joe, because we haven't really talked about it, but there's a strong quest for transparency, provenance, and evidence of sustainability.
Mm.
There are an increasing number of restaurants who will list where all their protein sources come from, all their major protein sources come from, as a way of reassuring you, not just that they're Australian, but that you could go and you QR code those farms if you wanted to be able to look at their farming practices. And I wonder, how we support that bit more in terms of psychology of eating. You talked about on-pack messaging, Tamara. There are lots of labels for it, but are there clear ones that get that through? Have we reached the most effective ways of storytelling that?
We have the technology that would allow that. So we can use blockchain technology, for example, to trace back. But we have not established like a nationwide labels or system. The thing is, the technology is there, but it's still an effort to scan those barcodes and to really look up the information. And what research shows is that people want to have those labels, but the usage is really low. It's like the same with other food labeling information as well, but it's there, so we can have that, and it's definitely increasing and becoming more important, not just to know where food comes from, but also when things go wrong, when we have a problem with the food, for example, and have to trace back where the issue comes from. If there's some bacterial contamination or anything, we want to know where it came from to, fix the problems. So it's
Yeah.
really important.
Now, I'm aware that we're coming to the close, and I would love you both to share in the terms of this topic. Or do we know what we eat and the psychology of eating? If you could change or influence one element in the whole structure of the several topics that we've talked about to help us, with a positive psychology of eating, but one only, it's quite small. What would you pick and why?
Maybe I can make a start. I think the one thing that would be a relatively easy thing to do, at least in a country like Australia, would be to better regulate soft drink consumption. Maybe ban them even if you could.
Why soft drink? What's the
Yeah,
target?
like fructose is just, it's an addictive, like sugar is an addictive substance. And if we get used to that in early years, we create all sorts of problems later in life. It's related to everything.
Right. So it's an addictive substance that we get introduced to too young. We're going back to under 16s, are we again? Maybe an under 16 soft drink ban?
Oh, I wouldn't dare to say it, but yeah, I mean, I would ban for everyone. I wouldn't like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Wow. Okay.
wouldn't
That's
want it.
Tamara's laid her card down. Joe, what would you say?
Probably energy drinks for those teenagers. Yeah, look, I think I would rather err to the carrot rather than the stick. I would like to find a way of not to dis I don't disagree with Tamara, by the way, but soft drinks are not doing anyone any favors. But I would really like to, under my mission, personal mission statement, which is about making healthy eating easier. Just simply making it easier for people to make the right choices. So when you walk into a supermarket, it's easy to know what to do with fruits and vegetables, to know that the confusion. I would wish I could clear up the confusion that there is around what is a healthy diet, because there's many different ways to eat healthily, but they share a foundation of eating whole foods. So, if I could make it easier for people to understand what is a whole food, what does it mean, and how do I put it together on the plate, that's my personal mission. Make those foods cheaper. Put a subsidy. That's perhaps at a governmental level. That's how we could do it, is make those foods easier.
Awesome. Well, we've covered a lot today, and it was kind of expected we'd keep coming back to social media. There is a lot that you get out of social media. It's fantastic. Cooking shorts, 30 seconds that show you how to turn whole foods into interesting meals. And it's actually transformed a way that a lot of us cook, is using, brilliant little short tutorials that teach us how to cook in a really interesting way. It's introduced us to a vast variety of food styles and cuisines that we would have to have gone and bought those cookbooks for and worked through. And there's something beautiful about that. And it will be interesting to see in this social experiment that we're in, what if you isolate, there's so many issues involved in the under 16 social media ban, especially mental health is like front and center. It will be interesting to see if nutrition is also changed and affected by it. It will be interesting because you can't separate that from things like, if young people are exercising more because they're outside, then there's a knock-on effect, and which will be positive to their health and well-being. I hope that this is the 200 food decisions for everybody, just compacted this 1 hour, and they can go off after this and not think about food. There's, just let it come to them, in a very Zen-like way. Or that if they are going to have a few more hundred food decisions, they're just good ones. And they're thinking about some of the issues we talked about, such as the importance of the environment and being aware of what it's doing for you, education levels, and just basically taking a little bit step further forward, basic calorie education, understanding, that it's not as simple as just can we afford to eat properly, that actually eating properly doesn't have to be as expensive as we think, and that we should be feeding both our brains, our environments, and our microbiomes as healthily as possible. For everyone who's listening, thank you so much for attending. For everyone who's listening on a podcast, next year, please do watch out for more solo topic podcasts. But there will be more webinars coming up too. So some of the topics we've got, recycling our ideas about food waste. One we really want to dive into is, how does Generation Alpha eat? So really look at that specifically, and eating yourself beautiful, the rise of collagens and all the other foods for like longevity of body and longevity of skin and looks. Tamara, Joe, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us all. I hope you have a wonderful Christmas, and everyone who's listening, thanks for dialing in.
Thank you.
Thank you, Matt.